Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, and after Mercedes have demanded change from the FIA with regard to the rules around porpoising and the fact that their drivers were suffering significantly with the effects of Baku, some teams have already turned down this request and so they want to keep things exactly as they are. Red Bull almost certainly among those names. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Really helps the channel. Plenty to dive into today. First of all, I've mentioned this from Charles Leclerc. His bad luck does seem to be continuing. Misses his flight to Montreal. So, like, he's going to get there in time. It's going to be okay, but not starting off his week in the greatest way. We did, of course, see that before Monaco, when he crashed that kind of a classic, I think it was a licky loud Ferrari into the wall. I think the brakes failed or something happened with that car. Brakes locked up. He crashed it into the wall. Maybe that bad luck at Monaco we didn't really help him at all, right? He at least finished the race in Monaco for, I'm pretty sure, the first time in his career, but it obviously wasn't the podium or the first place that he wanted and expected after, well, what's happened after, well, qualifying that weekend. And a very similar story, frankly, throughout his entire season so far. Now, this another bit of controversy that's been going down this past weekend, and also throughout the last several months, actually, and several years, really, is that with regard to drivers, especially around street circuits, deliberately yellow flagging the session after putting in a good lap. There was kind of a classic case, I think it was Monaco, maybe Schumacher 2006 or something, when he effectively put it on pole, and then he was deemed to have deliberately slowed down and stopped on the track, effectively, to yellow flag the session, prevent anyone else doing a faster lap. We've seen some discussion about this recently, because it definitely has been a thing when Alonso kind of went off into the escape road. Like, let's say you kind of accidentally go offline, put it in a position where probably the yellow flags have to come out in the session, therefore, like, people's other laps get ruined and stuff like this, therefore you can find yourself in a position where you might be getting an advantage, right? So there has been talk between the drivers about potentially encouraging the FIA to effectively give penalties to drivers that are deemed to be doing this on a more regular basis, because it's not really something which is considered too much, but it certainly was talked about, for example, in Monaco, and it's actually happened a couple of times now when Verstappen's laps have been ruined. I think the final one actually was in Baku in practice, but there's a couple of Verstappen hot laps that have been ruined by by the likes of Sergio Perez or others putting in the wall, red flagging the session. Of course, like, this wasn't intentional, but I think even from Verstappen after this particular instance, he was saying that, okay, at the end of the day, if drivers are putting it into walls after, putting a lap on pole, then we need to do something about that on a more regular basis. So we'll see how that goes, but yeah, seemingly the drivers and the teams want to help them, well, at least force the FIA to some degree to clamp down on these issues if they continue to come up for the remainder of the season. Let's talk briefly about Ferrari. This, I thought, was kind of remarkable. The last 5 races here for Charles Leclerc, been on pole pretty much every single time, but yet fallen short in every single race. Pretty difficult scenes. He's been on pole the last 4 races, failed to convert any of them, 2 of which, of course, have been DNFs. Now, Ferrari have said that the ICE, the internal combustion engine, and the turbo of his Ferrari were destroyed in that blowout on Sunday. However, though, he could use the turbo from the first power unit to avoid penalties in Canada. This seems to be a bit of a risk. Definitely people are talking about it as that, okay, this kind of first power unit that they had, the turbo from that, they could try and use it again in Canada, because if they use another one, if they take another turbo, they're already going to have to be suffering engine penalties, I believe. So they're probably going to say, okay, let's just try and hope this turbo holds out. But it is a bit of a risk, right? Because they could take an engine penalty in Canada, which would be very early to have to do so, but they're going to have to take some and effectively take a grid drop and try and fight back through the field, but effectively at that point give Red Bull and Max Verstappen another victory. Who knows, right? Or they just say, okay, let's just try it out and see how it goes from the front, and then, well, if the engine blows up again, the engine blows up again, right? Maybe that's what they're thinking, so we'll see how that one develops, of course. But also, try not to put too much pressure on the team. He says it's not a must-win for Ferrari, this Canadian Grand Prix, but it really does feel like it is, and in fairness, he said the same thing before the Monaco Grand Prix, which even then felt like a bit of a must-win, and he, well, of course, they failed to win that one, failed to win in Baku, and well, who knows if they're going to fail to win here in Montreal, but it certainly seems that's the way the championship tides are shifting. Let's talk Mercedes, because George Russell has been performing in a stellar manner so far this season, beating Hamilton in the last 7 races he's competed at, which is kind of remarkable. He will break the record for a teammate doing that at Hamilton if he outplaces him in Montreal once again. But Hamilton, of course, was having a very hard time in Baku. It actually was revealed a couple of hours ago that there was an experimental part, which certainly seems to be the case more for Hamilton than it does for Russell. They seem to just giving Russell the kind of stock car they want to run, and then trying out some experimental stuff on Hamilton's car, which generally doesn't seem to be working. So apparently this was kind of causing him further bouncing or more bouncing than Russell was getting, for example, and leaving him slightly slower and less competitive than his teammate was in the race. Russell was pretty much on his own for the entirety of it. But after this race, of course, we saw, Hamilton was struggling to get out of the car. Russell was having a hard time. Sainz, Gasly, Riccardo, they've all complained about what they're experiencing this weekend. So many drivers, of course, Mercedes especially, are saying that, look, we just can't deal with this bouncing as it is. Of course, Toto Wolff even said that, look, if we raise our ride height, that doesn't solve the bouncing issues because of the stiffness of the suspension on some of these more bumpy tracks. Therefore, something should change in the rules themselves, whether kind of active suspension or some sort of changes to suspension come back to make this kind of to make the teams able to deal with these issues, there are ways that they can deal with them if it's allowed within the regulations, right? But some teams that have done this rather nicely so far this season, Red Bull especially, are not going to be particularly happy with Mercedes trying to do this, right? So it has emerged, actually, that before the season even began, the teams figured out, as you would expect, that the way these cars were designed would create these porpoising problems. And there was actually discussion before the season began, supposedly, as to whether they should do something to prevent these issues occurring. I.e., pretty sure what they said was, we could have a potential, like a minimum ride height. So you have to run your car a certain height off the ground to prevent these issues. But in the end, teams didn't really agree on it, didn't really think it was a great solution, because it does theoretically reduce the performance of the car, because it reduces the downforce that you can potentially achieve if your car works like that aerodynamically. So eventually no one really agreed to it. They didn't end up going down that route, but they could have done before the season. The teams thought it could be an issue, and now of course I'm sure that opportunity or that potential could well be back on the table. But even if they did mandate a minimum ride height, that wouldn't necessarily solve all the issues, especially if what Total Wolf is saying is correct, or actually on these kind of bumpier tracks, it's probably a problem regardless with the suspension of the car, rather than purely on the aerodynamic front. So seemingly, like the FIA have said, we looked at it yesterday, that they were okay, we want to investigate, we want to get all the information, get the info from the drivers, from the teams and what they think, and see if there is going to be a resolution to this through the rest of the season. Now, seemingly, they need 8 out of 10 votes from the 10 teams to actually, become open to these technical changes. So they've said they are open to these changes that would address the uncomfortable ride of the cars, but not every team, understandably maybe, is willing to accept them. Indeed, the changes reportedly failed to attract the 8 out of 10 votes needed from the teams in the technical advisory committee meetings, while the race also state that last year teams knocked back a change that would have preemptively addressed this issue, as we just talked about. So rather interesting, right? So at least 3 teams have declined this. So you'd imagine obviously Mercedes would be in favour, as we've just seen, maybe McLaren as well, even though Norris didn't seem particularly impressed with what Mercedes are up to, right? So I think a lot of the teams probably look at Mercedes and say, okay, they're just trying to change the rules in their favour, as very clearly they are. But at the same time, are the other teams eventually going to come round to the idea, if these kind of races continue, that do we really want to be balancing a health of the drivers with performance, as Gasly said just a couple of days ago. Now, Red Bull, I'm sure, voted against this based on the words from Horner, as is described here in this article, and also what he said about the fact that he reckons Mercedes were, laying it on thick, let's just say, and playing up for the cameras with the issues they were suffering. So I'm sure Red Bull voted against this, as I imagined it, AlphaTauri, their kind of sister team in a sense, and probably other teams. Who knows how Ferrari voted in this though, right? Because they've been suffering with porpoising, but it doesn't seem to affect their their actual performance too much. And despite Carlos Sainz saying that this is an issue, I wonder if they think that potentially allowing these changes would make them less competitive compared to Red Bull. Who knows, right? That's the thing. At the end of the day, the teams, of course they care superficially about the health of the drivers, but fundamentally they care about where are they going to be, at least in terms of the actual competitive standings, right? So obviously the teams that are doing the best, like Red Bull, are not dealing with these issues, are going to say no. But as I say, if these issues continue over further bumpy tracks, Canada can be a bit bumpy as well. Silverstone, the resurfacing hasn't done great there. If this continues for the next couple of races and more drivers keep complaining, then maybe they will reach the 8 out of 10 votes required, so that technical changes could come into effect, and that would be rather interesting to see indeed. Of course, this is kind of what Horner said a couple of days ago, so yeah, almost certainly Red Bull voted against this one from the FA, so probably, at least for now, things will stay as they are, leaving Red Bull in the commanding position they currently have at the top of the championship. This is also rather interesting. The last time that it was P1, P2 for Red Bull drivers in the Drivers' Championships was back in 2011, when Vettel and Webber were P1, P2. This time it's Verstappen, Perez. The only driver to be maintained in both top 10s, of course, none other than Lewis Hamilton, right out well in the McLaren back in the day, from those different colours for sure, and are now in the Mercedes. But yeah, thought that was maybe a sign of things to come, given Vettel obviously did go on to win the World Drivers' Championship that year, and certainly Verstappen is very much odds-on favourite to do exactly the same this time around. This is also a remarkable record actually from Verstappen. Not been around in Formula 1, well, he's been around for quite a long time at this point really, but he's still so young in his career. He has the most podiums in Red Bull racing history, 66 now after this weekend compared to Vettel's 65, so that's kind of remarkable. At this number is only going to keep on ramping up through the rest of the season and beyond as well. Bit of news as well on Oscar Piastri, because rumour has it that he's going to, actually drive for Alpine in free practice 1 at Silverstone. So we see that they have to I think it's 2 rookie sessions each teams have to give to their rookie drivers each year. Now Piastri rumoured to actually go to Williams next season in place of Latifi, but it is technically an Alpine driver for now, so supposedly will make his debut there. We'll see how that one develops in a few weeks' time. Of course, look, we're going back to Canada this weekend. The Canadian Grand Prix has had some legendary moments over the year. Lewis Hamilton earned his first pole and race victory back there in 2007 in his rookie season, but yeah, going to be a rather more difficult time, I imagine, for him this time around, if the circuit is as bumpy as some people are fearing that it might indeed be. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.